Recovery podcast is real life stories from everyday people in recovery. From mental health issues, trauma, substance misuse, and behavioural addictions. Please visit the website www.lifeinrecovery.co.uk for links to social media and a range of books written by your podcast host, Bren Coy.
Hello and welcome to the Life in Recovery podcast, episode 55. In this episode of the podcast, I'm speaking to Dennis, who is the host of the Funky Brain podcast. He's also a keynote speaker and life coach, and he's been in recovery for over 17 years. It was an amazing conversation. I absolutely love speaking with Dennis. Really insightful, really knowledgeable, and extremely motivating. It was just a really, really positive conversation. So I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking with Dennis.
Yeah, I'm awesome. Everything's pretty good. I'm going through a separation right now.
Oh.
So that's been interesting, but staying sober, living the dream.
Yeah, man, that's all we can do, isn't it? So is this a long-term relationship?
8 years.
Wow. Okay. And how do you feel about it?
I'm sad.
Yeah.
Actually, I talked about it on with Arlena, and that was right like the week after it happened. So I was still like crying every 5 minutes, and it was like really sad. But I'm past that part. It's been like 2.5 months, and now it's just like waves of sadness, but not not the heartache stuff.
Yeah. Was it your decision or your partner's decision?
Well, yeah, at the end it was kind of mutual. It was really sad because we really love each other. We were just like unhappy and unfulfilled and for so long, and we couldn't figure it out. And so we were both like crying with boogers coming out of our nose, like kissing, and we knew we just couldn't go on anymore. And it was just really sad, but and what we did was brave,
Yeah.
It was brave. And a lot of people won't do that, and they'll stay. In the beginning, I was like, God, we wasted 8 years. But then you look there's a bunch of other couples, and everybody thinks, oh, look at that couple, but they're not fucking happy either. They're usually miserable and dysfunctional, just like all the rest. And, I look at them and like, at least we didn't waste 20 years.
Yeah.
Or 30 years being miserable.
And plus, I don't think I would never think about a relationship as being a waste. I mean, at the end of the day, you grow during that relationship, don't you? And one of the things that my sponsor said to me when my marriage ended, which was in 2012, we'd been together for 9 years and we'd been married for a couple of years. He said, couples either grow together or they grow apart. And and that really hit me right there, in the heart. And I just thought, like we're unfortunate. And if I'm honest, it wasn't so much that she didn't want to grow with me. It was more that I was kind of growing in this direction, and I was fairly new in recovery at the time, and I wanted her to come with me on this journey, but I was kind of pulling away as well, and it just wasn't fair on her, and we had the whole thing, what you just said then, the snot and the tears, and yeah, it was horrible. It was the worst moment pretty much of my life in terms of like how heart-wrenching it was. And I definitely came close to picking up a drink as well.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a program behind me at the time, whereas fast forward 6 or 7 years, my partner now, who's my fiance, and we've got a child together, we actually split up for a short period a couple of years ago. And because I had a solid program, I was able to deal with it quite well. And fortunately, I came to a realization about 6 weeks later that I'd made the wrong decision, and we got back together. But at the time when we split up, I was fine. You know, I was okay because I had recovery at the time. So yeah, and I'm sure you feel the same, that you're okay because you've got recovery, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, we're all going to be great. I don't think about drinking. I just want to be emotionally sound. You know,
Yeah.
emotional sobriety is always the goal. And, that's what I work on. I wake up this morning, I did a hike, I brought a book, I read, I brought a pad and I wrote and I meditated. And that's just do the next right thing every day.
Yeah. And how long have you been in recovery?
Since April 8th of 2003, 17
Oh,
years.
17 years. Wow, amazing. Nice. Obviously, just to give an introduction to you, you're a motivational speaker and an author as well, best-selling author. What's your book called?
My book is called Funky Wisdom: A Practical Guide to Life, and there's a reason behind all that too. And then I do life coaching for addiction recovery and life mastery, addiction recovery, and life and alcoholism. Because for marketing purpose, you have to stay in a niche. But I also focus on life mastery and food addictions, any type of addiction, and just how to deal with the real reason behind the addiction.
Yeah, cool. We'll definitely get into that. And you're also the host of the Funky Brain podcast, which
Yeah.
was brought to my attention by Arlena, actually. So Arlena and I did each other's podcasts earlier on in the year, and then she kind of flicked me an email to say, I think you and Dennis would have a great conversation. So I checked out your podcast. I watched her podcast. I watched her interview on your podcast, which was great. And then I watched the interview with Rob Kelly as well, who's also, he's going to be on my podcast in a few weeks as well. So
He is a trip, man. Wait till you talk to him. He's a funny guy.
yeah, the cool thing about it, he's from the same place as me as well. He's from
Oh,
Manchester
that's
in the
right.
UK. Yeah. So I think we're going to connect. I think we're going to have a cool conversation, and I'm sure we are as well. So yeah, where would you want to begin?
You ask me, man. You tell me.
So you live in Colorado now, and
Yeah.
were you born and raised there, or did you move there?
No, so I was born originally from New Jersey, which is on the East Coast, the Northeast, and I, finished up high school there, and then I went up to Vermont, which is where the mountains are, the ski hills, at least on the Northeast, and I was kind of a ski bum, crazy, wild chef, maniac, party guy for a long time. Everybody has a different story. Mine was whiskey and cocaine and cigarettes and just living that wild life for about 9 years then. And then at that time, I moved to Colorado, and that was 99, so 20 years ago. And what happened was, even during my worst, darkest, drunken times where I was really fucked up, I always skied. I would get up and go skiing, and that kind of kept my, body in check, and it kept me from being recovered. It kept me, somewhat athletic, somewhat mobile. And but once I moved to Colorado here, I lived in the mountains for a short time, and then I lived down in suburbia, and I stopped skiing, but I kept drinking and partying and and then eating fast food, and I just became this lazy, drunken bum. At the end, I was 70 pounds heavier than I am now. I was 240 pounds. I'm like 170 now, and dark circles under my eyes and just falling apart. And I mean, and I can get into details if you want to hear the details of what it was like before.
Yeah.
And, yeah. Oh yeah, cool. I mean, at the end there, I was just like, I met a bunch of people, and and what we say a lot in sobriety is like, when there's somebody active out there, they're not bad people, they're sick people, and that's a common thing that we hear, one of those cliches that we hear on a daily basis in recovery, and it's really true. But I also believe there are some bad people, and they're bad and sick. And I hooked up with some of them too. And I really went down a really dark place. And I stayed there for a couple of years. And at the end, I had just, the same story here, like emotionally, physically, spiritually, financially bankrupt, nowhere to go, passing out, peeing my pants. Like, who you see is not who I once was. And at the time, I had a girlfriend who was really awesome. And, maybe someday she'll hear me on a podcast say that she's awesome. And I'm grateful that she helped me, because I haven't seen her much since. in 16 years. But she came over one day and she was like, this can't go on. And I just started crying and I was like, I can't stop. I don't know what to do. It was the saddest thing, and I wasn't a bad person, but I just couldn't stop. At that point, I was in over 20 drunken car accidents. In rehab, they said, try to figure out how many times I drove drunk. And I think about 3,000 is about right. And I'm not talking like I had an extra martini at happy hour. I'm talking about like close one eye to stay on the road drunk, and that was every night. And some people don't have that story. Some people, I remember going to a speaker meeting like 15 years ago, and the woman who was the speaker had like 15 years of sobriety. And she was there because she drank 2 shooters of vodka every day, 2 little shots of vodka. And I was like, that's like not even enough for a drink. Like, you know what I mean? Like, to me, that's like breakfast.
Yeah.
And so that didn't make sense to me, but to her life had become unmanageable. And I think maybe she like smacked her kid or something happened. Like there was an incident that brought her to that place. And so whatever it is that defines your problem, and it has to come from you, you have to say, things aren't going well and I'm not happy where I am and I need to make changes. In my case, I just couldn't go on physically. We say I couldn't drink anymore and I couldn't not drink anymore. It was that gift of desperation, that hopeless place that brings you to growth and awareness and change. And that's where I was. And so she got online, my girlfriend, and she got me into this rehab center like 2 days later, but I stopped drinking then. And that was April 8th of 2003. And, like that book says, and I don't go to AA as much as I used to, but I do know the program. I spent a lot of time in it, and it really definitely helped facilitate my growth into the world, into the man that I am today. But I do know that book inside and out, and it says, there's a long period of reconstruction ahead. That's what that book talks about. And that was certainly my case. Because when you go back and you look at alcoholism, drug addiction, any type of addiction, it's like that's not necessarily the problem. It's part of the problem, but it's what I'm using to cope with the real problem, which is my thinking, thus the name of my podcast, the Funky Brain Podcast, because I have a funky brain, and usually my first thoughts aren't always the right thoughts, and there's a lot of emotion attached to them, and I just didn't know how to think or feel. And so, that goes back to when I was 5 years old. And then you fast forward to I'm 15, I take a drink and I'm like I don't have to feel that way anymore. It's hard for a little kid to feel that anxiety and fear and worry and resentment and frustration and not know how to process that. And when you're 15 and you take a drink and you're like, now I don't have to worry about that. And then you fast forward to when I'm 31 years old. Now there's 15, 16 years there where I never learned how to cope. And this is the reason most people fail in sobriety, is because, you take a 30 or 40 or 50-year-old that's been numbing out for 20, 30, 40 years with no coping skills. And then 2 days later, life kicks you in the balls, because that's what life does. And you're like, fuck this, I'm going to go drink.
Yeah. And this is the crux, because you did say this right at the very beginning, the underlying issues, and this is the crux of the problem for me that I've talked about a lot on the podcast and also written books about, which is that underlying trauma or emotional / mental health issues that we're trying to medicate with the alcohol or the drugs or the food or the sex or whatever, that then becomes an addiction. We lose control. And it's that whether it's a behavior or a substance, it becomes habitual, automatic, and obsessive compulsive, and that is what we class as an addiction. Interesting. The bit of the interview with Rob that you had that jumped out at me slightly, and I wanted to ask you a question, and I will also ask him when I speak to him. Is he said, I don't believe that you can become an alcoholic. He said, I believe you're born an alcoholic with an alcoholic brain. Now, that's completely fundamentally different to what I believe. I believe that anybody can become an addict. And I believe that alcoholism is just another drug. Alcohol is just another drug, and alcoholism is just in the plethora of addictions. So I wanted to ask your opinion on that. What do you think?
Well, I think it's learned behavior is my opinion on it. I think that just like anything, it's not a one size fits all. I think there are maybe some people that are born with that genetic component. I don't believe it's I believe that can become an excuse, and you can really buy into that, and it can inhibit your growth and ruin your life if you stay in that path. I think that it is learned behavior. It's easy to latch onto. I think that what I was saying right when we started talking, which by the way, I think you're awesome. I love our talk so far. But is that yeah, and I think that what it is what I said early on is emotional sobriety. So when you dig into that a little bit, it's like you have to think, I can still, after 17 years, be childish, fearful, resentful, angry, insecure, and blah, blah, blah. Fill in the blank of the day. So if I go in and say, well, I was born genetically that way, or I'm predisposed to numbing out because I don't want to be insecure, full of fear, frightened, and so I go to food, but food's not alcohol. So I think it's learned behavior. I think that I can still numb out and eat a pound of cookies. I'll open up that pound of cookie dough, that Nestle Toll House cookie dough, and I'll eat half of it while the other half's cooking. Why am I doing that? That's if you want to get into the AA program, the way that that's termed is alcoholic behavior. But what it is it's a distraction from feeling. That's what it is. So I still sometimes have a problem feeling. If you get to the underlying issues, and the book says causes and conditions, what's the real reason I drank? The reason people fail is because they fail to substitute healthy beliefs and behaviors for the ones that got them sick. Right? So, okay, I'm going to stop drinking. That's where the term white knuckling comes from. I'm going to stop drinking, and I'm going to sit at home and look at me. I'm not drinking.
Hold on.
I'm not fucking drinking. Right. And then somebody calls, or I watch a TV show that upsets me, or I'm doing something great and happy. Let's have a drink. Like I just don't know. I don't always cope with my feelings, happy, mad, glad, or sad, the right way the first time. And so I can drift into food, I can watch porn, I can do all these other behaviors that help me to not feel.
Yeah.
And that's my thought on it. I think that it's a learned behavior, and I think it can all be reversed. I think that we're not cursed to go through this awful life forever. There's ways to reverse your thinking, to reprogram your subconscious mind, which drives almost all of our activity that we don't even know that we're doing. And it could be, our subconscious minds are programmed between the ages of 0 and 18. When we're not qualified to program our minds, when we're not qualified to develop those types of beliefs and behaviors that are keeping us sick and that are keeping us from growing.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more with everything that you've just said. And I suppose the way that I've always described it is emotional disorder and mental health issues is termed the spiritual malady in the big book, isn't it? And when it describes the symptoms of the spiritual malady, well, every single one of them is an emotional issue. And that, to me, when I kind of delved deeper into that, I thought, well, okay, if you take away the kind of the mysticism and the hocus pocus of the program, and you just say the spiritual malady is emotional and mental health issues, basically, what is the solution to those problems? Well, the solution to those problems, as you go through the 12 steps, is you realize that you're dealing with those emotional and mental health issues. It's quite simple. And then as a result of doing doing the program, you then have what can be classed as a spiritual awakening, because it is a spiritual awakening, or if you want to be more kind of secular about it, a psychic change, which again is a perfect explanation of it, because obviously your mind changes because you've looked at all your stuff and you've dealt with it. So that's my understanding of it. I think that you can look at it from a spiritual perspective, or you can look at it from a scientific perspective and get to the same place. Does that make sense?
I think you can. Yeah, you totally can. And if you go to, I love Dr. Wayne Dyer's book. There's a spiritual solution to every problem. So
Yeah.
I think that I think that the spiritual piece is vital for success. And that's just my opinion. I think that there's different paths for everybody. In my experience, the spirituality has to be part of a successful program. And when you talk to people that don't understand the program, or don't understand, or they're locked into some old ways of thinking, they're like, well, I'm not into the religious piece of that. And I felt the same way too. And that's just that, what's that? Contempt prior to investigation. So
Yeah.
I'm saying, I used to regurgitate facts, figures, or regurgitate facts, figures, and whatever, things that I didn't know what I was talking about. But the spiritual piece, it's not necessarily a religious piece. It's just that and my mom used to tell me this, and that I love this. And she knew this 40 years ago. I was like, Mom, why do we go to church? Because I grew up Catholic. And I was like, why? Because there's church and football are on the same day. Like, why would God do something like that? And so I would say, like, what are we doing here? What's the purpose of all this? And I never understood it. But she said, and she knew this decades ago, it's just nice to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And she said that to me when I was a little kid, and she understood that. And I never did until I got into sobriety. And it was like, yeah, there's something bigger than me. There has to be. Otherwise, like, what is the meaning of all this, right? And, I was just had on another phone conversation with a friend, and we were talking about the infinite universe. Like, if you think there's no end to the universe, and I wrote about this in my book, but there's no, like, what's at the end of the universe? Is there a wall at the end of the universe? Like, and then who built the wall? And how thick is the wall? What's on the other side of the wall? Like, there's no end. It's an infinite universe, and we're just a speck in time. So how can there not be something bigger than us? The universe itself is bigger than us. So, and I believe in that power. I used to drink until I would throw up blood, and then I would wake up and start crying and look in the mirror and say, I'm never doing this again. And then I would walk over to the freezer and start drinking again.
Yeah.
I tried to stop over and over and over again, and I couldn't. And I was dying. But now, years later, I don't do that anymore. So what that means was I didn't have the power to stop drinking because I tried. I would drink till I threw up blood and passed out and wake up and cry, and I did that over and over again. I didn't have the power to stop doing that, but I don't do that anymore. So that means that a power greater than me helped me to stop doing that because I couldn't do it. That's all that means.
What was your experience of a spiritual awakening or a spiritual experience?
Well, and that's another thing. Like, I used to have this idea that, in order to have this spiritual experience or awakening, I'd be having to, like, have wings on my back and float around up in the sky and high five with Jesus and all that stuff. And I came to realize it's like, you know what? It's like Thursday afternoon right now, and I'm not drunk. And I didn't drive my car into things that don't move. And I didn't fall asleep and pee my pants. Like, that's part of my spiritual experience. Like, I have a beautiful life today. I live in a nice house, and I have I make a nice living, and I mean, I'm healthy. I woke up this morning and hiked up a mountain, and I read, and I wrote, and I meditated. And that's all part of my spiritual experience, my spiritual awakening. And it requires action.
Yeah.
Right? I think a lot of people are confused about that part. They think that they're supposed to wake up and have that similar idea in their head of what I thought was that I needed to be floating around up in the clouds to have this spiritual awakening and spiritual experience. But this is part of my spiritual experience. You and I sitting here talking, that's part of my spiritual experience every day. And I think a big piece is recognizing that you're living your spiritual experience.
Yeah, definitely. Would you say that yours is kind of the educational variety then? Because it kind of says in the book, doesn't it, that they're either of the educational variety or sometimes there can be sudden experiences. I mean, because I had a sudden experience at the end of my drinking, which led to me becoming sober, and then since then it's been kind of like a gradual education, but also peppered with really quite intense spiritual experiences as well. So I've kind of experienced both versions of the spiritual awakening, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. There's been times in my sobriety over the years where I've seen things that I couldn't explain, and I felt levity, and I felt like I was floating around in the clouds and everything's perfect, and health and finances, relationships, everything's falling in line, and you just breathe better and sleep better, and everything's just incredible. And I've had those experiences, but in my experience, it's not like that 24/7.
No.
And so, yes, mine is of the educational variety. Like I said this morning, like I increased my level of awareness this morning because I was reading and writing and learning about myself. And I was educating myself about me and about my place in the world. And yes, that's all part of it.
Yeah, I think I have this theory about enlightenment as well, that enlightenment isn't a state that you achieve forever, that it's more like it will be an experience that you had, and then you would then try to signpost other people towards that experience as well. I mean, that could be complete bullshit because obviously I'm not enlightened and I've never met anybody who claims to be enlightened. But I have this. The reason I suppose I've formulated that theory is because I've had through spiritual experiences with psychedelics and also with through meditation, I've had glimpses of that, and what it did was, I suppose the way it worked for me was I had the experience, and then to try to understand the experience, I then read about what other people had been through and researched these types of experiences. People who were much more eloquent than me and could put it into, a succinct kind of description. And as I read those things, I was kind of like, yeah, that was my experience, and ultimately what it boiled down to, which I think all the kind of religions point to and all the great mystics of the past have said, is it's about that oneness, it's about that interconnectedness of all things. The source, as Dr. Wayne Dyer called it, the source, didn't he? God, higher power, whatever you want to call it. And then in scientific terms, the 0 point field is something that they now describe it as, the Akashic records in Hinduism. Basically, this consciousness, I suppose, is what it is where everything comes from. Matter comes from consciousness, not the other way around. And that's kind of where I'm at. I'm just writing a book at the moment called All Is Now, the Science and Spirituality of Consciousness. So I'm delving deep into both the spiritual aspect of consciousness and also the scientific aspect of consciousness, and trying to meld the two. because I'm kind of I suppose I'm just open-minded, like I don't think anybody would describe me as being woo-woo, because I don't tend to go too far down that track. But then at the same time, I would say that science is only as good as the information that you've got at any given time, and science is prone to changing its mind, quite regularly. So, one of the kind of lines I wrote in the book was something along the lines of, the description of consciousness in the Hindu Vedas is just as valid as the description of consciousness in current metaphysics, because neither of them can give you a concrete answer. It's kind of very open to interpretation, and ultimately it's a subjective experience. Awakening, your day-to-day spirituality, any experience that you might have with God or a higher power, I could never give that experience to you, and you could never give that experience to me. You have to have it yourself, and then from there you can kind of build.
I love that. Yeah, and that's exactly right. You have to have it yourself. And I think, part of my problem, if we go into the word problem, but was I never took the time to learn things for myself. And I always took the easy way. And but another thing that came to mind when you were just describing all that was that is making a big deal. So I made a big deal out of everything.
Yeah.
Everything,
Yeah.
right?
A
You
drama.
yeah, the mountain out of a molehill. There was this guy in meetings, he used to say, I used to pole vault over mouse turds. And so that was me. And so now it's like, you know what? This is all part of my spiritual experience. Like if I'm sitting around waiting for the world, for the sky to part and like wait for like this like movie like experience of what God is supposed to be and how he's supposed to make my world appear, it's just not going to happen. And if it does, awesome. But if I in the meantime acknowledge what's in front of you. Like check this out. Like look, I'm not drunk today.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling pretty good. And I have a chance to have a great day today. And there's a pretty good chance I'm going to have a good day tomorrow. And that's part of the spiritual experience. And it's fun to jump in and explore things like you're talking about. The one thing you said that I love is the oneness. Whenever I think I'm experiencing a problem, it's because I'm not in the oneness of it all. I think like that's where my ego takes over and pulls me out of the equation. And I'm standing out there by myself going, what about me? And I need money and I need this and relationship and health and blah, blah, blah. And as soon as I get back into the oneness, the wholeness, which the whole basis of the program is to get out of my selfishness, right? And so be of service, get out. Once I'm doing that, then my problems kind of go away because they're not a big deal anyway, right? And so I love the oneness piece. Since we're talking about Wayne Dyer a lot, he said, about the water in the ocean. If you think of the ocean, like we're all like connected to the ocean, and you could take a cup of water out of the ocean, and you're apart from it. But when you go back in, now you're all part of this big ocean. We're all just one together.
Yeah, I tried to explain that to my mum by giving the analogy that I said, imagine you're a fish, and she said, yeah, okay. And I said, so your fish is in the ocean, yeah, and the ocean is God. So you've got water outside of you, and you've got water inside of you. So that's God consciousness, whatever you want to call it. I said, and you're the fish in the ocean, and she said, and I said, but as the fish, you don't know that you're swimming in the ocean. You're just swimming in the ocean. That's just what you do. We call it the ocean, but to the fish, it's just outside of it. It's just what is. And she goes like, I don't get it. That was my best attempt, but that's the analogy that I often use because it just makes sense to me that that God is everything. Higher power is everything, and we're just a part of that everything. And when we forget, like you said, when we forget that we're part of the all, we become separate from it, and the ego takes over and convinces us that actually, no, you're separate to that, you're separate to them. As soon as you see the divinity in other people, especially those that you don't like, if you got an issue with somebody, like I've had a recent thing going on for for over a year where I had this kind of issue with a person, and I had to just keep reminding myself that this person, using the God word isn't something that I always use, but, I said, this person is a child of God in the same way that I am. This person has got divinity in the same way that I have. This person is my mirror. This person is me, and I had to keep reminding myself and using the program and praying for that person's happiness. And, slowly but surely, I got to a place of forgiveness. And then I got to a place where the resentment kind of started to evaporate. And now, yeah, it comes back sometimes, but generally it's kind of gone. And that is the oneness, that is like taking yourself out of that selfish, self-centered thought pattern is very difficult for us, really, really difficult. And a question I wanted to ask you actually, whilst I'm kind of moving on to that, is obviously you're 17 years down the road now in recovery, and you work in the field and you do your podcast, so you're immersed in this kind of recovery world, and you're constantly talking about it and reinforcing the strength of recovery. And like you said before, you're out walking, you're meditating, you're writing. So you're doing all the things that the program suggests in order to maintain a healthy, balanced lifestyle. Where are you at in terms of your actual addictions? Do they raise their ugly head from time to time? Do you become obsessed or addicted to some things every now and then? Or do you feel like you've kind of become free from that now?
Well, my story is the alcohol and cocaine, and I was stoned for 15 years. But no, I mean, those don't ever come up. I don't ever say this is tough, I need to smoke a joint. But like I said earlier, what comes up, it's the behavior, right? So what comes up is I could switch into silent scorn, or aggressive passive behavior. I
Yeah.
can, or passive aggressive behavior. I can slip into cookies, or I can numb out and watch TV, or I can, there's a bunch of different things that I can do rather than feel. And so the idea, though, as you stay sober longer, it's not so much I'm better than you. It's just that I can see things quicker, maybe, hopefully, when I'm doing the things that got me sober in the first place.
Yeah.
So I always attribute it, if you go to a meeting, at the end of a meeting, everybody holds hands, and they're like, or they used to in the old world before
Before COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and everybody says, keep coming back. It works if you work it. Right? You've heard that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So what that means is, like, if you stop working it, it's going to stop working. And you might be I know guys with 40 years that suck. They're like the biggest assholes on the planet. And then I know guys with 6 months that are the happiest people on the planet, because they're doing all the things that we suggested that you do. So, I like to attribute it, or compare it to, like, a diet. So you go on a diet, and you talk to people that always have problems fluctuating with their weight or diet, and they're like, well, I tried that diet, it didn't work. Well, it did work. So you go on the diet, and then you do what it tells you to do. So you stop eating shit, you exercise a little bit more, you go for walks, and then you do that for a few months, you lose 30 pounds. You're like, this is great. So you start eating cheesecake again, and 3 months later, you put all 30 pounds back on. And you're like, well, I tried that diet, it didn't work. But it does work. And it's the same thing with sobriety. Again, my goal, no, I don't think about whiskey, cocaine, and weed anymore. My goal is to react sanely when situations happen. My idea of sobriety is, like, when something happens that I don't know how to handle, I know how I can act rather than react. I can be quiet and sit for a moment, think about things, or remove myself from the situation instead of punching holes in walls and acting like an asshole and saying shit that I have to apologize for later. That's sobriety.
Yeah. So you can essentially, as time is going along, you're actually just feeling your feelings more.
Yeah, and it's painful. Yeah, and it's painful sometimes. But the idea is awareness, right? And so all growth and awareness, sadly, almost only always comes from pain and suffering. So, and that's when I become willing, honest, open, and willing to see things differently and apply different methods in my life to live. And the idea is, now I could be doing a behavior that is harmful to me or is just unhealthy to people around me or whatever, and I could be doing that behavior. And the idea in sobriety, or just in life in general, as you grow up and mature, is like, I can notice that harmful behavior, and sometimes in an hour or a few hours or even a few weeks, instead of like 15 years. And so that's great. And you know what? And then recognize it, fix it, shift gears if you need to, and then go have a good day.
Yeah, that's what I mean. In my own sobriety, that's my own recovery, I went through, once I put the drink and the drugs down, about probably 3 or 4 years into my recovery, it was the relationships I had to deal with and the sex conduct, so I had to do a lot of work around that. And yeah, I mean, like, in hindsight now, looking back on it, it was just growing out of that adolescent behavior. I hadn't grown out of the 14, 15, 16-year-old, horny boy that I was. And now, as a nearly 40-year-old adult, I can actually keep it together, stay in a relationship. Yeah,
and you recognize it. And then, we're still going to go back. Remember, it's progress, not perfection. So I'm going to say, we always want to strive for perfection. We always want to try to be better. I was taught you always want to be going uphill. And if you're not going uphill, you're sliding back downhill. There's no planing out. And what the way that I say is that people are mistaking pushing uphill for struggling. It doesn't necessarily have to mean struggling. It just means I'm striving to be a better person than I was yesterday or even an hour ago,
Yeah.
right? Let's just keep trying to be better, and sometimes we're going to fall back. But people without drug and alcohol problems, they fall back too. And there's a lot of them driving around on the road giving people the finger that are just miserable in their lives and they don't know what to do about it. And that's where the term happy alcoholic comes from. I'm grateful that I had these problems in my life in my younger years because it got me to this place where I can learn how to grow up and live a happy, productive, useful life.
Yeah, 100%. And you said that you don't attend as many AA meetings now. Is that a particular life choice, or what's the reason behind that, would you say?
And it's interesting, and I can go into it. Well, it's more of a recent realization I had. And first of all, I love AA. It helped save my life. It put me on a path of not only recovery, but growth and awareness and growing up, really, because that's what really it's about. It's being able to, it's not a not drinking contest. It's about growing up. You just said that adolescent behavior, looking the world in the eye, being honest with yourself and the world around you. And but I think there's more to learn. And in the book, it even says seek help outside where necessary. And I have a mentor. I don't do this by myself, and a coach and a mentor. And Rob Kelly will get into some of this stuff with you too. But there's further growth to be had. And what I found was like I would go to a meeting anytime anything big came up, and I never learned how to get through that. So what I found was that can be another addiction too. Now, I went to a meeting last week. But before that, it was a few months. I've been
Yeah.
going through this heartache by myself. I like going because the number one thing, well, one, the program is very profound. I think it needs a little updating. It's old. And I think that there's some things that we can do to really, bring it to another level. But again, it's one of the most profound programs ever written on the planet. But in my opinion, the biggest asset to AA is the fellowship. So one of my big problems, and I'm sure you can relate, and a lot of people with alcohol drug problems, my intuition, my intuitive response to when I get overwhelmed is to sit at home by myself and try to figure it out and isolate. And that's what got me sick. So when I'm dealing with fresh new alcoholics or people that are trying to get sober, I send them to meetings. I think they're powerful. I do not recommend cutting AA or NA or any A out. I think it's powerful for the fellowship and for teaching you how to live when you don't know how to. But then I think you have to also grow beyond that too.
Yeah.
And it could happen to you in 6 months, or it could take 15 years to happen. But whenever it happens, I think you have to continue to grow. And so that's my thing. Again, no problems with AA. I've loved it. It saved my life. If you love AA, and I don't mean just Ren, I mean anybody who is listening right now, keep going to AA, But I think that there's growth to be had in anything in life. Continue to grow as much as possible. When you stop growing, you die.
Yeah, it's that bridge to normal living, isn't it? I mean, I found that COVID has been an interesting situation, really, because obviously we went from having the physical meetings to only having the Zoom meetings, which were amazing and were a lifesaver for many people. But what I found was that because I actually have a strong daily program of recovery, I found that I was absolutely fine in this situation. There was no issues, especially in terms of I didn't ever think about picking up a drink, and I actually managed to deal with much more of my kind of ongoing, daily relationship issues, which rise up every now and then quite quickly because I was in isolation with my partner, so we had to deal with them quickly. B, I was picking up the phone a lot more and speaking to my sponsor and speaking to other members a lot more. And C, I was much more relaxed because I was working from home. I was able to walk the dog twice a day rather than, just coming home and kind of rushing out for a quick walk. So life has kind of slowed down during this pandemic for me. And it's actually helped me to really appreciate everything that I've got. And how lucky I am, really. But in terms of meetings, now I've gone back to the physical meetings because they've started to open up now in the UK. Whereas before I was always doing 3 or 4 a week, I'm doing 2 a week now, and I'm doing this podcast, every Thursday usually, and that's really working for me. And I don't place a massive emphasis on the need for me to go to a meeting for myself. I go there now primarily to help the newcomer to share and hopefully to pass on that message of recovery and to just offer, an insight into what's available and what's on offer, because I just celebrated 10 years a couple of weeks ago. And, it was obviously when you get to the 10-year mark, you really reflect. And especially in my case, I was drinking for 10 years and now I've been sober for 10 years. So, it was that kind of beautiful point that I reached where I was like, wow, this is kind of like a really cool moment. And actually, the main thing that I've learned is similar to what you just said, really. That is, AA is absolutely wonderful, and NA and all the A's, like you said, for dealing with that particular issue. So, if you want to stop drinking and you want a new way of life, go to Alcoholics Anonymous. If you want to stop taking drugs, go to Narcotics Anonymous. If you want to stop using food in that kind of in an addictive way, go to Overeaters Anonymous. They work, but there's so much other stuff outside of it as well, and there's so much more to learn, and there's so many different ways to grow. And I think you're doing yourself a bit of a disservice if you don't branch out a little bit and try, I think, primarily to discover who you are and what you like, outside of the fellowship. So yeah, I really agree with what you've just said there. And another question I wanted to ask you as well, in terms of the kind of underlying issues that we were talking about earlier in your life. So obviously, again, now 17 years sober, but you've been through all those years of addiction, and you must, and being a kind of a podcast host and speaking to so many people and reflecting constantly on your life, you must be able to have a pretty solid view of what was happening in those early years that might have led to the addictive lifestyle. What have you pinpointed? Like, what have you looked at, and how do you interpret that stuff?
Well, I think I kind of touched on it. It's because I never learned how to feel, and I never learned how to cope. And there was this guy years ago when in meetings, and he was an old timer, and he would just say, "Welcome to kindergarten." That's what this is. This is what this is. If you break down the 12 steps, it's a basic how to live program.
Yeah.
So I'm full of this anger, resentment, fear, insecurity, blah, blah, the problem of the day. And I don't know how to handle that stuff. Well, here's how you handle that. Okay. First, here's the problem. We have to admit there's a problem. Then maybe there's some sort of spiritual component. Let's calm down. And then let's clear out. Let's take an inventory and see what's going on. And then this is kind of what's going on. Here's some defects and stuff. And then let's clear up the past, and then let's go help some people. And then let's keep doing that. Like, it's basic shit. That's what's going on here. And so I never got that basic shit. So when I start my book, my book is Funky Wisdom. And right in the beginning, it says, when my sister, who's 3 years younger than me, when she was like 14, 15 years old and learning life's valuable lessons, like how to handle heartache, disappointment, fear, financial responsibility, like some things that some normal people learn along the way, and some don't, but some do. And she was doing that, and I was snorting cocaine on a toilet seat somewhere and thought I had life all figured out, but I didn't. I never learned that. And a lot of it, I can even dig into like my parents' divorce when I was 7 years old. And, and this stuff I didn't realize until just maybe 5-7 years ago, like on a real conscious level, is that back in the 70s and 80s, when there was divorce, there wasn't shared custody like there is now. It wasn't week on, week off. I only saw my dad every other weekend. So it was like 4 days a month. I had a male figure around. So I had nobody around to teach me how to be a man. It was just me and my mom and my sister. And so what happened was, over the years, and this is really interesting, is that what I did subconsciously was I gravitated towards men who I thought were cool or whatever, because I didn't know how to do that. So the problem, like, so it was good and bad. So if it could have been good because I could have latched on to some cool, intelligent, bright, smart, productive people, but I latched onto a bunch of idiots along the way too. Because I thought they laughed a certain way or listened to cool music or drank enough or smoked weed or whatever. So I did that like subconsciously. And that kind of took me into some bad areas of my life too. And that's kind of what I attribute it to, is just like I just never learned life's skills, how to be mature, how to treat a woman, how to be intelligent, how to be open and honest about your feelings, how to act when something happens rather than react and punch holes in walls. And so I just never learned how to be a mature person. And I still struggle with that sometimes. I can still slip into those behaviors. But again, like I said earlier, hopefully I can recognize them sooner and not have to go through so much pain before I get to that point where I'm willing to see things differently and learn and grow.
And what kind of advice do you give to people who are kind of struggling or new to this? If somebody's currently in a position where they're thinking about making a decision to ask for help in some way, whether it's a substance or behavioral addiction, how do you approach that now in the work that you do?
I say we start right away. And I'll say this, like I make commercials and I do all ads and all kinds of stuff that I do. I say, call me now, right now. Like if you're watching this podcast and you're struggling, some people watch this podcast with you and I or my show, your show, whatever, and they're just trying to get some tidbits and continue on their sobriety, on their journey. And some people are sitting at home struggling right now, thinking about killing themselves. I say call right now. Right now. Let's just have a talk. I give you my cell phone number and my email. I'm like, call right now, not tomorrow when you're sick and hungover again and you spend all your food money for the week on buying shots for people at a bar that you don't know, or buying an 8-ball with, instead of paying for your kids' food. Like, call me right now. Go to a meeting right now. Call somebody that you trust right now. Like, don't put it off anymore, because this life goes quick, and it's like there's this it's like a poem or inspirational message, but it's like every 60 seconds you spend upset is a moment of happiness that you can never get back. Don't waste another moment. Like, start right now. So I say, what happens is, like, if you say, I'm going to wait this was really good listening to Ren and Dennis talk. That was some good information, but I'm going to go buy an 8-ball now. So you know what? It's like, you were just there. You were right there. Don't wait any longer, because that tomorrow, or I'll call tomorrow, that could be another 5 years.
Yeah.
Or during that time, you can get in an accident and spend the next 10 years in jail. Or you can kill yourself. Or I just had one of my close friends from 30 years ago call me I think it was 2 weeks ago today, Thursday, because he has cirrhosis of the liver. He never stopped. That's where I was headed. So I say call right now. Make those changes right now. When I'm working with people, like, and something comes up, whether it's a specific drug or alcohol issue, or if they just want to accomplish a goal, or they want to improve their relationship, I say let's start changing that behavior right now, because tomorrow might never come.
Beautiful. And on the flip side to that coin, as somebody gets, further into recovery, and let's presume that this person, similarly to yourself and myself, are following all the suggestions, working a program, not picking up, the various substances that used to, cause us all the problems in the first place. Do you feel as though you progressively kind of shed those addictive behaviors and those kind of ways of thinking and behaving, or do you think that's something that always stays with you? Because this is something that I'll give you the example. So food. So I have openly talked about food as being my primary addiction now in recovery. So I gave up the alcohol and the drugs. Then it was on to relationships and sex, dealt with that, and then it slowly but surely, primarily sugar, started to creep in over the last 4 or 5 years. Now, 5 years ago, I used to come home most evenings, and in the same fashion as I used to drink, I would go to the local convenience store, and I'd buy whatever it may be, say a box of 4 ice creams, a pizza, and whatever, and I'd eat one ice cream, and I'd say I'm not going to have any more, and before you know it, all 4 are gone. Now, I don't do that anymore. So 4 or 5 years later, I don't eat 4 ice creams in one go, but I still do have the occasional binge. I eat it most days, so I pick, biscuit here, a bit of chocolate there. And I've actually been to Overeaters Anonymous a couple of years ago and worked the program and was doing really, really well, was actually abstinent from all those kind of food behaviors. And then the pride creeped back in and, and ended up kind of lapsing and relapsing back into those food behaviors. But I'm definitely nowhere near as bad as I used to be. And I think this is the kind of the narrative that I'm continually telling myself. You're getting progressively better, so don't worry too much about it. And I just wondered what your take on that is. Not only my thinking, but also generally, do we get better as time goes by?
It's the same behavior, Ren. I mean, like we could talk about it again, and I could talk, obviously, but it's the same thing. It's a distraction to something I don't want to do. So when we get into my type of coaching, which I learned from my mentor, my master, David Essel, who's like a brilliant man, but he came up with the one thing theory, and this is what I teach my clients all the time. At any given time, we're working on one thing only. We're all juggling. We have 10 plates in the air, and none of them ever get done. So your one thing might be, something that can be done in an hour, or it could take a year. So it's like we just have to determine what that is. And usually when something comes up like this, because I know exactly what you're talking about, I've been there. I talked about it earlier. I'll eat that whole pound of cookies. A pound of cookies. That's not normal. Right? So that's the same thing as drinking a fifth of whiskey and snorting an 8-ball and smoking 3 packs of cigarettes. So it's excessive behavior. It's something I'm using to distract myself from feeling or thinking or something I need to do to get me here. So when we talk about the one thing and narrowing it down to what's this one thing I need to work on? Well, it's usually the one thing that I've been delaying or procrastinating the most. And that thing, until we get that done and address that, I'm going to eat. Or I'm going to watch porn. Or I'm going to go do something else rather than do that one thing. But here's the thing. It's like once we do this one thing, then everything else just kind of goes away. And I talk about, this guy came to me once because he was drinking too much. He was like 38 years old. And he's like, I can't stop drinking. And he was drinking a lot. And he was like 40 or 50 pounds overweight, and his wife was getting fed up with it. And so we started talking about his drinking, and it turns out that he was in debt up to his eyeballs. So we had to address the debt, and we started to work on that. We saw where all of his expenses were going. We narrowed it down piece by piece. And this is where life coaching comes in. And this is the difference between the life coaching and AA. Like AA kind of stops at a certain point. But we really dig into that. And what happened was he stopped drinking. We got his finances in line. He lost 40 pounds. His relationship with his wife was never better. And the drinking went away. The drinking was what he was using to not have to feel. Yes, to not have to feel, to not have to do the hard work to figure out. Well, he was in debt. He couldn't figure out how to get out of it. So rather than do that, he started drinking.
Yeah.
And so the food is the exact same thing. And then the thing with, somebody for a bunch of millions of us or when in AA is that, we reach that point where there's that physical part too. So there's the mental obsession and the physical allergy, right? So I can't have one, or one's too many, 1,000's not enough. All the cliches, we'll get back there. It's the same thing with the food. So I can't have a cookie unless I'm doing well. If I'm doing well, I can have a cookie. But it's like, if there's something going on that I'm not addressing, I'm avoiding, or I'm distracting myself from doing or feeling that thing. So once we address that, then, these other things kind of go away.
Interesting. I mean, you've got me thinking now as to what, because I mean, I talk about all the time. I've kind of discussed this with many people. Like the Buddhist theory that, well, not theory, that what Buddha said is that life is suffering. That everybody suffers, and that at the core of everybody is this kind of like humdrum of what we experience as either boredom or craving. It's pretty much the same feeling. So I've often said that my issue around picking up, whether it's food or porn or whatever the thing may be, because it doesn't become an absolute obsession, an addiction, it's just something like you just said there that I'm using to avoid whatever
It's
it
a
is.
distraction.
Yeah, a distraction. But I've always said I'm just distracting myself from that base feeling of whatever, just discontentment, let's call it, discontentment. And, everybody that I've kind of read, especially Osho, I used to read a lot of Osho's stuff, and he just used to say, one of his phrases was, shut the doors, shut the curtains, and sit down and meditate and just feel it, just be with it. So I've often thought, yeah, that's probably the answer. And it's just like when I'm eventually ready to do that every single time, it'll kind of pass. But you've just got me thinking now as to, are you saying specifically at that time there's something that might be going on in your life that you're not dealing with, and therefore that is what you need to deal with? Or are you saying that is always there and you just need to learn to cope with that? Or is it both?
Well, I think, getting back to the major thing that I love about AA is the fellowship. But the other good piece that they have, which is huge, and it's sponsorship. So outside, so I don't have a sponsor, but I have a mentor still, and I have an accountability partner. You can call it whatever you want, a sponsor. He's my coach, and that's David. And I think that what we're talking about in determining your one thing theory, and then having somebody hold your feet to the fire to make sure that you're working on that one thing or whatever on a daily basis, right? So when we talk about improving ourselves and growing, it happens on a daily basis. You can't do this every other day, depending on what you want to do. If you want to be mediocre, then you could do it every other day or every week or whatever you want to do. But what we're talking about is like figuring out why I'm doing that behavior. And in most cases, it goes back to it's subconscious thinking, subconscious behaviors that have been developed years ago that I need to work on in order to change. Because the conscious mind, this is my to-do list. My conscious mind says, I'm not going to eat. I'm going to do this, and this. This is my to-do list. These are my plans. These are my goals. And my subconscious mind says, let's go get some chocolate. And I end up doing that. Your subconscious mind doesn't know if that's right or wrong or harmful or healthy. It just does what it just
Programmed.
does. Yeah. It's just programmed to keep you comfortable, to keep you there. Yes. So we have to in order to change that, it requires daily activity, and it's usually doing the things that you don't want to do over and over again for an extended period of time. And then you're reprogramming your subconscious mind. So that's what I say is this. To answer that question with a long answer was that we need an accountability partner. You can't do it by yourself, depending on what your goals are. Now, if you want to make $1 million a year and you're making $50,000 a year right now, it's probably not going to happen. But if you have a mentor to guide you through the process, that could happen in a couple of years if you start doing the right things and working towards that.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I heard then when you were talking was accountability. And I can relate completely because in my life, as it stands at this moment in time, I speak to my sponsor maybe once a week. I don't speak to him every day, certainly not. And as you were talking and explaining the process, then I was thinking, the feeling I get normally when I get off the phone from my sponsor, that relief of, I've got all my shit out, we've dealt with anything that needs dealing with, what I'm doing is I'm bottling that up for a week and then and then dealing with it all rather than doing a daily check-in, whether it's a sponsor or, like you said, another member of the fellowship or an accountability partner. So that makes a lot of sense. And I think that, ultimately, like, it's got to be somebody that understands these issues, or is in, like, for me, it has to be somebody that's in recovery, that's working the same program, because I can talk to my partner about absolutely anything, but it's not the same when it comes to dealing with these issues, because she's so close to it. She's emotionally invested into it as well. I need an objective view. I need somebody to just tell me how it is, without any emotion attached to it at all. So yeah, I completely get that. So thanks very much. That was really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I do what I do, because you need to have a coach, right? If you think about baseball, football, any cricket, soccer, football, whatever, everybody has a coach, right? I was taught have an expert in every area of your life, right? So I am not. If I get sick, I need to go to the doctor. If I have to go to court, I need a lawyer. I hate doing taxes. I need an accountant to do that every year. So, and it's like, I need help getting here with my business. I need help trying to decipher my relationships. I need help sometimes with my health. But whatever it is, I need somebody to help guide me through the process and then keep me accountable. And that's what I do. And you had one of my clients on your show actually recently.
I did. Yeah. He mentioned you. Yeah, he did. Yeah. And I've just released that podcast. It was a really insightful conversation as well. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's so crucial, to have somebody. You said an important word. She's emotionally invested, right? So she's emotionally attached to whatever it is you're going through. This is your partner. So you need somebody who's not emotionally attached to your situation, who says, oh, you know what? I'm sorry you're going through that, but here's actually what's going on. Or why don't we look at it from this angle? Or in my case, I ask a lot of questions to get you to figure out what the next step is.
Yeah.
Right? Because if I start telling you all the answers, you're going to get dependent on that. You're going to say, Dennis, what is the answer to this? And I'll say, do this. And you're like, oh, well, that's easy. I don't have to figure this out on my own. And then you don't grow. And I think that's one of the other places AA falls short a little bit, is like, I think there's a limit on the growth there, So I think if you can get into something deeper and, reverse the thinking. So another thing that we work on is called emotional regulation. So, you go to AA and they're like, okay, well, here's what's going on. You're an alcoholic and you have to keep coming back, and then we'll work on this, right? But what I teach is that when you get into it's recognizing your flaws, defects, whatever you want to call them, where I used to shut down in conversations, right? So I would get silent and I wasn't emotionally available. So why don't we change that now? Okay, let's put myself into a situation where I talk with somebody and where I would normally shut down. Why don't I, I have that awareness, why don't I start engaging with them instead? Why don't I smile and ask them a question and have them feel good? This is like being of service. I'm getting out of myself, because usually when I shut down, it's because the conversation wasn't going my way. Yeah. So I get upset and I shut down and I don't contribute to the conversation anymore. So now I don't do that anymore. Now I notice when I'm doing it and I switch it, and now that's growth. But I rarely do it. Rarely do you figure these things out on your own. I didn't. It came through writing on a daily basis, like my behaviors, my beliefs. And then I had somebody, David would be like, do you see what's going on here? And I'd be like, well, now I do. I wish I saw that 5 years ago.
It's all dependent on how much you're willing to do the work, isn't it? Because I think if I'm totally honest, listening to what you were just saying there, I mean, the importance, you've just really highlighted the importance of having essentially a coach, like you said, of having somebody who can help you through this, because I know intellectually, I know everything that you've just said already. And you said, you have the answers yourself. And it's not just I have the answers myself. I have the answers because I've been in recovery for long enough and I've had millions of conversations and I've done plenty of research to know that what you've just said is absolutely true. But my arrogance gets me to a point and a level where I go, well, I do know everything, so therefore, why do I need to ask anybody else for the answers? Because I've already got the answers myself. And it's that trap, isn't it? And that's not an alcoholic thing. That's just it's just an ego
It's
thing.
the human condition.
The human condition, yeah. Not asking for help, thinking that you've. I mean, you know, I love these conversations because I often find myself saying on it, like being really truthful about stuff that I would never normally speak to anybody about. But one of the things that I wrote about recently in the book that I'm writing at the moment was I said, there are certain people throughout my life that I've considered to be like my heroes that I kind of look up to, but nobody in real life. These have always been people that have been famous, like whether it's a famous DJ or a soccer player or a movie star or whatever, somebody that's up there. But in day-to-day life, in real life, I have very, very rarely met anybody or aspired to be or asked for help from somebody who I think is kind of like in a place, like it says in recovery, doesn't it? It says, ask someone to be a sponsor who's got what you want. My arrogance always prevents me from going that far, because I always think, well, I've got everything that I want anyway, so what more do I need? And actually that's my immaturity. I think, it's my immaturity because I'm not seeing what's really there in front of me. There's people out there that are very successful at what they do, and I could ask for those people to help me and really benefit from that. And I've not. And I suppose having this conversation is helping me to realise that that's probably the next step for me. And with this podcast, I've reached a place. I reached a place with the podcast where I actually ended it. I did a podcast with my dad, which was about 3 or 4 months ago, and I thought I'm going to have a break. And part of it was to do with I felt like I'd said everything that I needed to say. And then I really missed doing the podcast. I really missed having these kind of conversations. So I decided to get back into it. But I spoke to Arlena a couple of podcasts before the last one. And, I said, I'm a bit at a crossroads. How much effort do I put into this? How much do I give it 100%, or do I carry on giving it kind of 80%? Do I reveal my identity? Because obviously I've always remained anonymous. It's an anonymous name, and I've never shown the video. I've always just uploaded the audio. So that's where I'm at right now. And I think what we spoke about, Arlena and I, is that she was kind of saying, well, what's holding you back? Something's holding you back, and I think what you've just said there is put the key into the lock. Is what's holding me back is I'm doing it all on my own. I don't have a sounding board. I don't have anybody that can kind of guide me through what the next step, the next.
Now you do.
Yeah, cool. No, that's cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And something else too, and I've been saying this, and I even wrote in my book that I took the honesty, open-minded willingness, and I made a chapter out of it. It's the how approach. How do I become successful? How do I have good relationships? How do I become sober, healthy, whatever? And it's honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. And, and we always talk about that, and I always stress the willingness too. But one thing I'm realizing lately, and I was just talking about this with David, is like, you don't have to be 100% willing, or even you don't have to be willing at all. You just have to do the work. So if you find somebody that, that has what you want, or isn't emotionally attached, or maybe knows a little bit more than you about this situation, and they suggest that you do this, then do it. And you'll become willing once you see some results. So you don't always have to be willing even at all. You just have to do the work. And, and do the things that you don't want to do, and you're going to get where you want to go. Because those things that I don't want to do, they've been looming over me. That's what's keeping me from being successful, happy, healthy, having a good relationship, blah, 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 whatever. And so when I start doing those things on a regular basis, and I have somebody making sure that I do those, then I start getting where I want to go. Emotionally, physically, financially, relationally, whatever.
Yeah, my first sponsor said, the suggestions, but it's kind of like if I throw you out of a plane, I suggest that you pull the cord for your your parachute.
I haven't heard that in a while, but I do remember it. It's such a great analogy.
Perfect analogy. Yeah. So, what would you say that life in recovery means to you, Dennis?
What does it mean to me? Well, it means that I get to live and breathe today. I mean, I would have died. I was on the path to death. I wouldn't even have been around for cirrhosis. I would have just died. My body was shutting down, and I would not be here. So, when you hear a lot of the people say a lot of the same stuff all the time, but my life every day is truly a gift. It's all extra time. It's all borrowed extra time. And our purpose, I used to struggle a lot with, why am I here? Why am I here after driving drunk 3,000 times, driving my car into a house, rolling my truck numbers of times, doing so much cocaine where my heart was going to pound out of my chest, smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day? Why am I here, healthy, happy, now 48 years old, and you'll hear about some young girl walking across the street and gets wiped out by a drunk driver? How come she didn't get to experience a beautiful life like I have? But why am I here? Well, and if you struggle with your purpose, what is the reason that we're here? It's all the same thing. It goes back to that God thing, that ocean. We're all one. We're all connected. Our reason, our purpose for being here is to be of service on some level. When you wake up in the morning and you're stressed out, put that aside, go help somebody in any way possible to get out of yourself. And if we all did that, the world would be a different place.
It certainly would. I mean, I've always said that, the meaning of life is to live a life of meaning, and that ties in with, finding your purpose. And if you can't find your purpose immediately, like you just said, make your purpose just helping other people, just pick up the phone or go out and just do something for somebody else, and immediately alleviates that kind of stress and the selfishness, the washing machine head, as we call it. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. Where can we find you online, Dennis?
At dennisberry.com. That's where, you can get anywhere else from there, but my podcast is on YouTube. I do the video podcast, and that's the Funky Brain podcast with Dennis Berry. And yeah, that's all. I'm not really pushing anything. I'd love to get to know people. If you're struggling with anything, give me a call. I'll help you find a way through it. I have good systems and processes in place, which I've shared some with you. Yeah. And, alcohol and drug addiction is your problem. Great. If you just want to figure out how to start your business or go to the next level or improve your relationships, I can help get you there too.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for spending the time. And I'm really looking forward to doing your podcast next week as well. So
that's right. Yeah, on the 27th, I think. I'm super excited. Yeah. And we're going to have another great talk, and I know we will. And yeah, I look forward to it too.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks, man.
Thanks very much for listening. And if you've been affected by any of the issues discussed in the podcast, just look underneath the podcast at a range of links to mutual aid organisations. Please don't forget that you can support the podcast at patreon.com/lifeinrecovery. And if you go to the website www.lifeinrecovery.co.uk, you'll see links to all my social media and all my books. Peace and love, and goodbye for now.